Thank you very much, and thanks to you and Senator Murkowski for accommodating me in this. Ms. Hayes, I've got some questions regarding PILT. PILT is an important program for my state, considering that the federal government owns about 2/3 of the land in Utah. As a result of that, states like mine depend pretty heavily on PILT payments. But it's important for us to keep in mind a few factors, including the fact that the cost of having a lot of federal land in a particular county goes, I think, potentially far beyond the lost property tax revenue. It also, properly understood, has to include all of the lost revenue that would come from economic development that might otherwise occur on that land, whether that occurs in the form of traditional energy development or renewable energy development, certain kinds of recreational activities that may or may not occur on the land as a result of its federal ownership, or any other kind of economic activity. Now, I understand that PILT was not intended to offset the lost revenue that might come from these lost economic development opportunities. I get that. But this context makes it important for us to consider those revenues when considering what PILT was designed to do. Now, at the time PILT was enacted, at the time the program was created by Congress, it was understood that the total funds received by most local governments under the federal lands revenue and fee-sharing statutes in existence at that time seldom approached the level of revenues that would be collected by ad valorem taxes, the property taxes, were these lands in private ownership. So judging from that language, from that legislative history, from the understanding that was in place at the time PILT was created, the PILT program was, I believe, intended to make up that difference, with the goal being to make up for the lost revenues due to the presence of federal land, and not simply the compensation, not simply to provide compensation to counties for their out-of-pocket expenditures in terms of their maintenance of infrastructure, roads and other infrastructure on federal land. So if that's the case, then shouldn't payments under the PILT program be made at least to be roughly equivalent to what those counties might be receiving in ad valorem property taxes?
So I appreciate your question. I can only answer that the PILT Act, the way it's constructed now, specifically defines per acre values and a sliding population scale to be used for the payments. When Congress enacted it in 1976, I've gone back and read some of the history around the long debates over it. I mean, there were a lot of debates about the equivalency to local taxes and to the tax base, and it's not perfect by any stretch, but there was a lot of angst and agonizing about how to establish rates for the act.
You can certainly sympathize with those taxing jurisdictions and the plight that they incur, because you concede, I assume, that in most, nearly all instances, the amount that they receive under PILT is a very small fraction of what they might otherwise receive if they were able to tax those lands, even if it was at the lowest rate, say the Greenbelt rate.
So I'll say, I think the next panel has a couple of people who will be able to speak very clearly to the lack of equity across and how the payments impact individual counties. It varies because of the population factors, it varies because of the acreage clearly, and then one of the very big variables is that the payments factor in a deduction for prior year revenue payments. So if there are large revenue payments, then the PILT payment goes down.
Right. Now, the federal government is by far the largest landowner in the United States. No one else comes close, or even comes close to coming close. The federal government owns about 30% of the land mass in the United States. Most of that land is concentrated in the western United States, and most of that is concentrated in just a small handful of states where the federal government owns a majority, or in the case of my state, a very substantial majority of the land. Given the fact that most of that land is concentrated in just a few western states, when we're told over and over and over again as Westerners that, hey, everyone benefits from federal land ownership, don't you think there ought to be some offset? If everyone in the United States benefits from federal land ownership, then shouldn't those, isn't it a little bit unfair to make those who reside in those few states pay for what everyone else benefits from?
I think I'm not the expert to comment on the fairness of it. Like I said, it's not perfect. It is the way Congress constructed it. I think those are clearly the debates you'll be having in reauthorization.
I understand Congress created it, and I see my time's expired. I'll just leave you the parting thought. Keep in mind, as the federal land manager of the largest swath of federal land in our country, as you manage that, we're already suffering because of the relative dearth of income that we have as a result of that federal land ownership. There are things you can do to offset in some ways that absence of revenue in the way you manage it, in what you permit and what you don't permit. Thank you very much.